Good morning. Hello. Guten Tag. In Portuguese?
Bom dia.
Bom dia.
Guten Tag. Guten Tag. This is as far as my German goes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure for me to be in this circle, especially with my friend Silvia Pimentel. She is a role model for me concerning her membership in CEDAW committee in Geneva. She was a member for 12 years in Geneva, and she was also a very, very gifted chair in this time. For me, her most impressive work was to elaborate the draft of the so-called General Recommendation number 33, Access to Justice. Thank you, Silvia.
May I advise you to maybe take off the headphones?
I could.
Otherwise you will
Yes,
be hearing the simultaneous translation.
I
It will be-
prove. I want to see whether
Oh,
the
okay.
translation
Oh, no, if you
in
want to-
Portuguese is okay.
Okay,
That's
right.
my intention. That was my
Okay,
intention.
I'll do it myself. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. The title of my presentation is Women's Rights Are Human Rights versus Violence Within the Global Society, Challenges in a Conflict-Affected World. You know, we have the 16 days against violence against women all over the world. It's the Orange movement all over the world. And this is why I'm here and was invited. After a small introduction, I would like to start with a statement: war instead of peace, the patriarchy is the global structure behind all social structures. Then I shall raise the question, violence, why? Then I would like to inform about gender hierarchy in times of globalization, Article 5A CEDAW Convention. Then I would like to report about the so-called missing link, gender-based violence and General Recommendation number 35, updating number 19 in 2017. Then I would like to speak about human rights for women and girls and a better life for them, with a question mark. And perhaps a small excursion will follow about gender-relating killing, feminicide. You are the experts, not we in Europe, but you are the experts. And I would like to add some personal remarks to this problem. So if you agree, I would like to start.
We agree.
Thank you. The UN Fourth World Conference on Women, held in Beijing in 1995, bore fruit. Article 14 of the Beijing Declaration defined women's rights as human rights. Within the framework of the 12 critical areas of concern, the platform of action formulated most strategic objectives, inter alia, to combat violence against women and poverty. In my opinion, both are interlinked, but not only. The goal of the platform of action is to investigate the causes of violence, to develop effective prevention and methods, and to eliminate violence. As a judge, I know that all human beings share a profound desire for justice and fairness in their interaction. Perhaps you have children or grandchildren, and when they are very small, in the age of 2 or 3 years, they are so interested in fair play. They are the best equal persons of the world. After then, the education stops these interests and they become good capitalists. As the end. This profound desire for justice and fairness is confirmed by most recent research. Neurobiologists revealed that cooperation constitutes a fundamental principle to the survival of humanity. For a successful cooperation, people have to meet as equals and persons in the legal sense on equal footing. The Austrian scientist Ernst Fehr, economist and researcher at the Institute of Economic Research, ETH Zurich, defines men as homo reciprocans. That means somebody with a sense of fairness and justice, as well as a sense of appropriateness. Not everybody is the enemy of everybody, but everybody is a friend of everybody. This is the message, yes? For him, the so-called homo economicus is a myth. Man always makes one's own behavior dependent on the behavior of others. He calls the reaction of many people to refuse something unfair inequality aversion. Remember the small children. They have inequality aversion. The American sociologist Richard Sennett writes in his book, Respect in a World of Inequality, that a lack of respect granted to the individual is as hurtful as an insult. In contrary, enjoying human dignity requires acceptance by other people, which finds expression in respect. There is a German sociologist with the name Hartmut Rosa, and he speaks about resonance. It comes from physics and musician. Resonance as a concept of the relationship to the world and a solution if acceleration is a problem and could be a tool for a better life. War Instead of Peace. The great Austrian historian Gerda Lerner dealt with patriarchy research to investigate the structure behind all social structures. Her scientific finding was that half of humanity, the women, was not recorded in traditional history. For centuries, the achievements of women thus remained undiscovered and undisclosed. This is a disaster for women's self-concept. Every woman should study women's history once in her life to get down to her roots. In fact, patriarchy as the system of unconditional male supremacy has prevailed worldwide. Irrespective of ethnic origin, religious orientation, or political systems, women, even if they often bear the main burden of unpaid work within the communities, have been marginalized by hierarchical structures and exclusion. Peace is unable to rule. A female German military sociologist told us this sentence many years ago to guide us on our feministic way through the jungle of social norms and instances. Much later, when I came across the book of Gerda Lerner, The Creation of Patriarchy, I understood that peace in reality was and is not a category of social action within the system of patriarchy. It is a warrior system, a warrior for a warrior society, warrior armed society, sharing any time period in a post-war period and a pre-war period. Especially we in Europe, Germany and Austria, we had the Second World War, yes, and we were the perpetrators of the Second World War. And when I was a small girl in the 50s, my grandparents always spoke about a post-war period. And I thought, a post-war, what is it? What is? And it was a post-war period, and we are also in a pre-war period at the same time. Patriarchy can be described as the rule of old men with the power to define and enforce social norms, so-called patronomy by Horst Hermann, a German philosopher. It works with exclusion and the creation of hierarchies. The vertical structure of society do not depend on qualifications in the sense of a ranking order. It is a gender-based power relation. Between women and men, there is a permanent war as well as between families, other social groups, and nations. This is not normal, but it is common in patriarchy to disseminate and maintain hatred and discord. Violence, why? What is violence? What are its causes? How can it be prevented? What could consistent prevention mean? The German neurobiologist and doctor Joachim Bauer has pursued violence research for many years and published his work in numerous scientific and popular science media. His book, Threshold of Pain on Origins of Daily and Global Violence, deals with previous theories about the emergence of violence and compares them to most recent findings of brain research. He makes a distinction between aggression and violence. He defines aggression as any physical or verbal act aimed at confronting, attacking, harming, injuring, or killing another person. This context presupposes the requirement that it is an act a victim refuses or seeks to avoid. For the human brain, pain is an important trigger of aggression. Social exclusion and humiliation also means pain and is comparable with physical pain. It touches the so-called pain threshold. There is an obvious connection between everyday violence and the denial of personal respect, violation of honor, and damage of reputation. Bauer finds a connection between the imbalance of livelihood opportunities and aggression, in particular between poverty and violence. Like a pain memory, there also exists an aggression memory. He also describes the phenomenon of aggression displacement. We often raise the question, why does a young man who is violated in his honor or in his health will go to a woman 10 days later and kill her? Why? Why? And the answer is there is a phenomenon called aggression displacement. Aggression displacement. When perpetrators show aggression at the wrong place or at the wrong time. Aggression is always wrong, but we know this is a displacement. Bauer, the displacement of aggression has already been known for a long time. It can either concern the object or the time. Aggressive impulses are not always directed at the person who has provided the provocation stimulus. They can also be directed at or displaced onto a different person. For instance, the wife, the daughter, the mother. The displacement may also concern the time when aggression is expressed. People who were exposed to trigger stimuli sometimes show aggressive reactions only with a considerable delay. On the other hand, for social beings such as humans, the sense of belonging and acceptance are essential resources for their lives. Bauer stresses the importance of education and social role models, and I'm adding the importance of human rights education, in particular for women and girls. Women know many forms of violence, structural and individual. violence in the public or in the private sphere, physical, mental, psychological, and economical violence. Violence committed by strangers or within the family, often by a husband or an intimate partner. Forced exploitation by third parties or voluntary self-exploitation for subsistence purposes. Perhaps, sex workers and prostitutes. Sexualized violence or other types of violence during the childhood or as an adult, during a war or in so-called times of social peace, etc., etc. Without any doubt, femicide, rape, trafficking in women, exploitation of prostitutes and sex workers, and FGM figure among the worst acts of violence against women inflicted on them. Gender hierarchy in times of globalization under Article 5A CEDAW. My opinion, Article 5A CEDAW Convention is the key element of this convention. It is the provision which formulates the obligation of the state parties to take consistently all appropriate measures to eliminate stereotyped roles which are based on the idea of the inferiority of women and girls, and to eradicate prejudices. The book Gender Stereotyping, Transnational Legal Perspectives by Rebecca Cook and Simon Cusack deals with this subject from a legal point of view. In the introduction, Louise Arbour writes, within a country, stereotyping is liable to pervade different sectors of national life, whether it be in education, employment, or health service. While the content of stereotypes might vary according to different countries and sectors, they generally function to constitute as systemic beliefs that justify women's subordination in society. Gender-based hierarchy means unequal and unfair power relations between women and men and serves to maintain this power distribution to the detriment of women and girls. The worldwide economization of all areas of life caused by capitalism and hardliners in politics made the situation even worse. Thus, it is not surprising that state parties have troubles to report under Article 5A or even misunderstand this provision. The missing link. CEDAW Convention fails to cover violence against women and girls explicitly. Therefore, it was important to formulate General Recommendation number 19 in 1992, dealing with violence against women. Therefore, it was necessary to state in an interpretation in accordance with Article 1 CEDAW. Discrimination includes gender-based violence that is directed against a woman because she is a woman, or that affects women disproportionately. South Korean lady and expert Hee-Soo Shin, a former member of CEDAW committee, called the subject of violence against women the missing link of CEDAW Convention. Thank you. 25 years later, the prohibition of gender-based violence was evolved into a principle of customary international law. In 2017, CEDAW Committee adopted General Recommendation number 35 on gender-based violence against women and girls, updating General Recommendation number 19. In many state parties, domestic legislation addressing gender-based violence against women and girls remains not existent, inadequate, or poorly implemented. The major causes are often traditional, cultural, or religious ideologies, and the lack of budget allocation. Some major issues of this GR are, for instance, perpetrators can be the state party itself, but also non-state actors, including private persons and armed groups, and intergovernmental organizations. Violence takes multiple forms, including acts or omissions. The state party has responsibility for acts or omissions of itself and his organs, for those acts and omissions of non-state actors attributable to the state, and has due diligence obligations for acts and omissions of non-state actors. In addition, both international humanitarian law and human rights law have recognized the direct obligations of non-state actors, including as parties to an armed conflict, for instance, including the prohibition of torture, which is part of customary international law and has become a peremptory norm, jus cogens in Latin. GR number 35 makes a distinction between legislative, executive, and judicial level. The recommendations deal with prevention, protection on the one hand, and prosecution and punishment on the other hand. Coordination, monitoring, and data collection, as well as international cooperation, are additional issues. There are no definitions concerning violence and its multiple forms. Istanbul Convention, that is treaty number 210 of the Council of Europe, which entered into force in August 2014, can help. Article 76 stipulates an invitation for accession by non-member states, also Brazil. There is a new global campaigning for an international treaty ending violence against women. Rashida Manjoo recommended it when she was a special rapporteur against violence in 2012. Now the goal is an every woman treaty. Yes, the Europeans do not like it. They are so happy with Istanbul Convention, they do not like it. But perhaps other continents will like it. Human rights for women and girls. The system of human rights is a concept of philosophy and legal philosophy developed in Europe during the Age of Enlightenment, about 300 years ago. Olympe de Gouges was the first female who addressed that women were not included. Now, today, including women and girls, the concept implies the equality of all human beings in dignity and rights, basically stipulating the fundamental rules of cooperation of all human beings with each other and the responsibilities of the member states of international human rights treaties. CEDAW Convention and its optional protocol were milestones to create and enforce women's rights as human rights and are legally binding. Very important. Austria ratified CEDAW Convention in 1982, optional protocol in 2000. Meanwhile, several weaknesses within the Austrian legal system were already eliminated. I was one of the mothers of this movement. Again and again, it is shown that criminal law has an important role for the position of women in society. New legal instruments were established in Austria. For instance, the so-called Austrian model against domestic violence with a so-called protection order issued by the police, specialized women NGOs, and the courts. Or, for instance, grooming, new provisions against grooming, against stalking, etc., etc. New ways of access to justice have been opened. Now I would like to speak about femicide, but only some words, because you are the specialist, the expert for femicide. Femicide, feminicide, is a common legal term and means the killing of a woman and also a girl or a female infant on account of her gender by perpetrators with a special premeditation, committed in particular by men, sometimes by women, in a specific cultural context. Or in other words, a gender-based hate crime defining the intentional killing of females because they are females. Although statistics concerning homicide show more males than females as victims of murder, so there could arise the expression that femicide seems to be less prevalent. This is wrong. Statistics often do not differ between gender-related killing against women and murder of men, and do not give enough information on this phenomenon. It is a matter of fact that the circumstances of those crimes differ distinctly. Males are often killed in the public space by perpetrators with different motives. Gender-related killing against women and girls and female infants occurs often in the private sphere by well-known perpetrators as husbands, intimate partners, sons, or parents. The term femicide exists for more than 200 years and was used first in England. In the middle of the 19th century, it became a legal term and was published in the famous Wharton Law Lexicon. The women's and feminist movements picked it up, and female scientists like Diana Russell described femicide as a crime with sexist motives, being on the extreme end of a continuum of anti-female terror resulting in deaths, often interlinked with sexual violence. In many cases, the offender-victim relation is private and intimate. To control female sexuality can be a strong impetus for those offenses. This seems to be a taboo in many societies. Misogyny means hatred of women. Perpetrators are women hater. In Austria, you cannot speak about women haters. No Austrian believe in this. It is manifested, for instance, in social exclusion, sex discrimination, hostility, androcentrism, violence against women, girls, and female infants, sexual objectification, and hate speech, in particular in the internet. The goals are to oppress half of the world's population by tradition, cultural context, religious context, philosophy, and leadership. Female offenders, for instance, performing harmful practices like FGM, etc., have internalized sexism and self-hatred. They torture next female generations to fulfill the message of patriarchy. And what is patriarchy? We heard it from our friend Gerda Lerner. Some personal remarks to this complex. Lawmakers, police, and judiciary fail if they do not understand that gender neutrality means gender blindness. Neutrality isn't the peak of fairness and denies the existing unequal power relations between women and men. It isn't the best democratic law enforcement of human rights under CEDAW Convention. If the rule of law and the legal system doesn't take into account women's real positions within the society, often not being treated as humans and legal objects, and not being treated on equal footing with the other 50% of the population, the legal framework is not in line with the core obligations under CEDAW Convention. From this point of view, I think that correct and comprehensive investigations, including the reporting of phenomena like overkilling, hate speech, confidential, embarrassing videos, etc., but also firearms at home, are and proper forensic evidence are very important. To gather this information, it's a very, very important thing, and it is essential to complete the mosaic of the perpetrator's motivation. Often, the investigators stop after the first steps. Oh yes, he was jailers. Oh yes, she stole him money. She stole him money. Oh yes, this is the ground why she was killed. No, they should investigate it correctly. Yes, that's the point. Women and NGOs can help in this regard. Gender bias are a very big problem. Racist and sexist stereotypes. For instance, in seeing missed females as runaways and prostitutes, for instance, in the United States, often they argue a young woman left her children behind and was a runaway. But she wasn't a runaway, she was killed and lied in the garden of her husband. Machismo, including the stereotypical roles of females, especially in the media. These factors, these elements hinder a result, proving hatred of women. The consequence is that prosecutors and judges have not enough material to accuse and convict the perpetrators as a femicide murderer. Yes? I also understand the legislative problems which arise by defining femicide, and we should take into account that it is a matter of sovereignty of each state party to define crimes in a specific way. Some questions arise for me. For instance, should femicide be defined as a separate category of major crimes and with a provision with elements of hatred, contempt, and possessive behavior? Or would it be better to define aggravating circumstances of murder? What should the perpetrator's status be? Could a perpetrator only be a male, or could a perpetrator also be a female offender? Should it need sexist motives for the crime? Should the crime committed only in the interest of males, or should be defined other goals in a cultural context, etc.? The feminist academia have elaborated different forms of femicide. Convert femicide, racial femicide, intimate partner femicide, homophobic corrective femicide, serial and mass femicide, gang rape, etc., etc., often in relation with destroying the woman's corpse. An example of best practices are in Latin America and its countries. Guatemala was championed the use of femicide as a concept by incorporating the legal term in its constitution with Decree 22 in 2008. And Brazil, I think, since 2015 have a feminicide law. Yes.
An article.
One article.
One article. A part of an article as aggravated.
Part of an article. So I want only to speak about a better life for all women. Today, many scientific disciplines deal with happiness research. Generally speaking, happiness and the good life are not only understood as a personal feeling of well-being, but also as the interaction of favorable factors such as welfare, harmony with fellows, as well as with the environment. Some examples: Bhutan objectifies and measures the satisfaction of its citizen on the basis of so-called gross national happiness. The scientist Hartmut Rosa mentions the concept of welfare, education, status, distribution of resources, etc., as major indicators of well-being. Parents all over the world wish a better life for their children. SDGs should be broken down effectively and worldwide to the national level and be implemented in all member states of the UN, not only in the developing countries. SDGs are for all countries. For women, a life free from violence and poverty would be the better life. And now my conclusion. Peace instead of war. Brazil has an impressive National Action Plan 2017 to 2018, incorporating the main principles of Security Council Resolution 1325 and the following resolutions, which promotes women in a proactive role in peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. GR, General Recommendation of CEDAW Committee number 30, in 2013 will be also helpful. The strategic goals of your National Action Plan are gender mainstreaming and empowerment. The Maria da Penha Law on Domestic Violence 2006 and the Feminicide Law 2015 are milestones of the promotion against violence against women, and I hope Europe will follow. Substantive equality for women and a life free from violence and intersecting discrimination, poverty, and armed conflicts will help for a better life. So my slogan is peace also between men and women instead of war. Thank you very much.